Hey, what is up, everybody? Welcome to the Guilty as Charged podcast, coming to you live on a special edition of the Guilty as Charged podcast with our guy, Daniel Popper. Tyler is unavailable tonight, had a work mishap, and unfortunately, we were not able to get the whole crew in here with Mr. Daniel Popper, but excited to chat with him nonetheless. Pop, thanks for joining us for a special edition of the Hops with Pop / Guilty as Charged. How are we doing tonight?
Doing great. Thanks for having me.
We are always excited to have you. You have always put out great content, but you're now doing a Substack. We're trying to push as many people as we can to get to the Substack. And if you guys listening and watching are not in the Substack, we definitely encourage you to go do that. Where can they find the Substack? What kind of content do you have coming down the road now that free agency is done? Selfishly plug away with the Substack.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I appreciate the retweets you guys have been giving me. Yeah, so I was doing the YouTube stuff for a while and wanted to restart it and start doing it consistently, and wanted a platform where it would be pretty easy for me to kind of do the live stream and then get it out there to various podcast platforms so people could listen in the car, listen on Spotify, listen on Apple. Got in touch with Substack, and they really were able to offer me everything I was sort of looking for. And so it's hopswithpop.substack.com. You can find the link in my Twitter bio. We're in the off season. We're doing weekly shows. During the season, we were doing twice weekly. So recap shows after the game, and then scouting report preview shows. Got a lot of stuff in the works. Going to sort of feel it out and figure out what's good for everybody. And the chat has been really great through free agency. In there a bunch. Just communicating with people, answering questions all the time, sending my cap updates in there. I just felt like it would be better to sort of create a community where we could get people in there that were, willing to have some less toxic conversations about the Chargers. It felt like X and other platforms had just gotten to a point where it was not really constructive. And I was really excited about how free agency went. I felt like the conversations were great. I felt like I was able to be more interactive there. It's just taxing to try and do it on X when you just have all of these different players and you're trying to block people and mute people. So you sort of curate it in a way where you can do it properly. But I just felt like, let's try something new and see if it works. And so, yeah, you can find me there. And then for now, everything's free. You can get it on Spotify and on Apple as well, Hops with Pop. So you can listen in the car, listen at the gym, whatever. And so we're getting it rolling here, and things are going well. And I appreciate you giving me the opportunity here to plug it a little bit.
Of course, happy to do so. I must say it is much more entertaining if you are in the Substack when Popper is live. I have tried to do the whole replay thing when I've missed it, and it's just not the same. So it's a great community. We did a similar move with Discord.
Yeah.
So we launched a Discord app, and we've had some great conversations in our chat there. But Substack, same kind of deal. So if you're able to catch Mr. Daniel Popper live in the Substack, it's a ton of fun, gives you a ton of great content, and truly best in the business as it pertains to Chargers coverage. I'm not just saying that because you're on the show, but it is real. You have earned that title, in my opinion. So
I appreciate that, man.
I encourage everybody to go check out Hops with Pop on Substack. It is well worth the subscription.
Appreciate it, man. Thank you.
Of course. In the spirit of Hops with Pop, are you drinking anything tonight?
Just water for now. I figured I'm here making a professional appearance. When I do my Substack, I can be ridiculous and off the walls, but I feel like I come on here and be Big J journalist for you, Steven.
There we go. Big J journalism. If you guys in the chat, in the spirit of Hops with Pop, want to let us know what you're drinking tonight, feel free and go ahead.
Let's go. We got the chat going. All right. Yeah. Let's make this a real chat experience.
Fitness says that there needs to be a bong with Pops. I don't know if we can make that happen or not.
Oh boy. I don't know. I don't know if we're ever going to get there, guys.
No. Hops with Pop.
Sorry to burst your bubble.
Yeah, that Hops with Pop rolls off the tongue. The other one does not. But definitely let us know what you guys are drinking if you're drinking. The rundown tonight is going to be pretty simple. I have some questions that I have prepared that we will talk about with Mr. Popper tonight. And then we will open it up for about probably 10-15 minutes for questions from you guys.
Hell yeah.
And we'll kind of have a good conversation, hopefully about 40-45 minutes with Popper tonight. So I think the place that I want to kick this off is, now that we have the free agency settled, what's your big question that you have about the Chargers roster as we move towards the draft? I mean, the Chargers still technically get to make some other moves, but what's your biggest question about the roster now that we are kind of pivoting towards the draft?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think like there are still needs on the roster, but I feel like as you head into the draft, there's kind of like 7 positions that you could see them taking at any point on the first 2 days of the draft. Running back, receiver, tight end, interior offensive line, interior defensive line, edge, corner. That's kind of where I'm at. So I guess my big question is like, how does the board fall in the draft, and how do they choose to approach sort of attacking the needs? Now you can look at this in sort of 2 ways, right? Like I think on the positive side, the fact that they can attack all these different positions is a testament to sort of how they've built depth through free agency. But the fact that they have needs at all these positions is also an indication that they're kind of lacking top end talent at a few different positions. And so I think they've given themselves flexibility. My big question is, how do they utilize that flexibility to attack the draft and sort of take that best player available approach? I think a lot of teams talk about best player available approach.
Yeah.
The Chargers, with how they've approached free agency, have really set themselves up to do that in a way that maybe we haven't seen the Chargers do it in previous seasons, which I think should be fun and interesting for the fan base.
Yeah, but I mean, Tom Telesco and previous regimes always talked about taking the best player available, but they were never really able to do that because it was always like, well, you head into the draft with no starting left tackle, like you're going to take Rashawn Slater or Christian Darrisaw and whoever falls to you. But at pick 22, with this kind of draft, where I was listening to Jordan Reed on the Athletic Football Show with Robert Mays, and Jordan Reed was talking about basically players 16 to 40. There's not a ton of difference. And so for the Chargers, who have done a really good job of adding flexibility, they're just going to be able to kind of let the board fall. And if a guy you love is there at pick 22, then you take them. And I think you can kind of figure out the position and how they fit into the depth chart, in training camp, essentially.
Yeah, exactly. It wouldn't surprise me if any of those 7 positions were the pick at 22, and like there should be an option there. The interesting thing is we do this exercise at the Athletic where we do the beat writer mock, and we've done 2 so far, and the board has not fallen in a very advantageous way for the Chargers. And I never would look at one of those beat writer mocks and be like, okay, this is indicative of what's going to be. But now that we've done 2 and the board has not really fallen in a way where like, oh, one of these tight ends is there, or Tyler Booker is there, or receiver that I like is there, or whatever. I've had to think it through a little bit. I think the first one I ended up with Kenneth Grant, defensive lineman out of Michigan. Second time through, I went with Omarion Hampton, the running back at North Carolina. Kenneth Grant was there. Like both of those seem realistic to me, but I think it's going to be a situation like you said, where, I think there's these perfect world scenarios where like, Ashton Genty falls or like Tyler Warren falls, but in reality, they're going to be picking in sort of a different tier of player. And the question is, what are they prioritizing there? Like, do they feel like they need that difference making interior defensive lineman? I think that's viable, but to me, Derek Harmon's the guy I would like more than Kenneth Grant. Like if you're taking a defensive lineman at 22, you'd love some pass rush upside. And I don't know if Kenneth Grant brings that. You're really looking for a difference maker there at 22. So is it running back? How badly do they want a running back? Do they feel like they can maybe wait till the second round and get the guy with some juice to pair with Najee Harris? So it's a fascinating situation because there are a lot of different things that can happen as far as how they approach this draft. And like I said, there's 2 parts to it. It's like they need top end talent, but they've also done a really good job of, we talked about this on stream. I know you like the term, Steven, draft proofing, which I stole from Zach Berman, who I think he stole that from Howie Roseman. Zach Berman covers the Eagles. You want to set it up so that you can really attack the player that you think is the best. And I think they're in a position to do that. It's going to be fascinating to see how it plays out.
Yeah, I think you mentioning the pass rushing defensive tackle. I think that to me is like the biggest hole on the like the starting, projecting the 22 starters, 24 starters, depending how you feel about like the slot and the nickel and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Because they went and signed, a Tyler Conklin. And even though the offensive line, I still think could be a little bit more upgraded, and they could definitely, upgrade, behind Thule and Khalil, and they could upgrade at corner.
Mm-hmm.
They don't really have anybody that can truly rush the passer on the interior. So, Derek Harmon is definitely somebody that I am interested in, at pick 22. There was, I think in your beat writer mock, he went at pick 12 to
he was gone.
So
that probably would have been my pick. Like if he had fallen and the board was the same, he probably would have been my pick there. I worry about taking a run stuffing defensive lineman at 22. And also, you factor in the context of the team, right? Like Mike Elston, the defensive line coach got really good productivity out of a bunch of players that were sort of picked up off the scrap heap in the run game. So you feel like he's probably going to be able to get that. I don't know. I'm sure you watched Deshaun Hand. I liked what I saw out of him as a run defender. Like, I thought he was like, he's a viable guy in that department. I agree with you though. Like, where is the pass rushing coming from? Are you relying on T.R. Tart to be that guy? Morgan Fox leaves, and I don't think you can overlook what he brings in terms of his pocket pushing and then some occasional, quick wins. Naquan Jones, I think he has some upside as a pass rusher, but I don't see the consistency there where you can rely on him to be like your number one interior pass rusher. So I'm with you there. I think that's probably a weakness on the roster right now.
Yeah. And then obviously offensively, the tight end was the big one that people are talking about with the Chargers and obviously Colston Loveland, but it doesn't sound like either tight end is going to be there. So the Tyler Conklin signing that came down last week, I think was a smart decision for the Chargers to, again, just give them that option there. I want to ask you kind of just like a roster construction question, because they have a lot of 1-year contracts again. Obviously, they signed Mekhi Becton to a 2-year deal. Elijah Molden was extended on a multi-year contract. Bradley Bozeman, multi-year contract, but that's really, a 1-year deal that they can get out of.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts as they've built this with just kind of running back 1-year contracts at a bit of a higher pay scale? Last year was a lot of minimum contracts. This year, it's a lot of like 1-year, $3 to $5 million contracts. Is this kind of what you expect going forward with Joe Hortiz, or do you think this was them kind of looking at the free agency class and thinking, hey, like we don't really love this free agency class?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of that. You always have to factor in the comp pick component.
Sure.
And so like when you sign relatively cheaper 1-year deals, you're going to set yourself up for guys that are going to factor into the comp pick formula pretty significantly. I mean, you look at what Poona Ford signed for with the Rams, what Christian Fulton signed for with the Chiefs. Those are guys that are going to factor in and offset some of these other signings, the Mekhi Becton, et cetera, signings that they made. So I think that's part of it. Also, now all these contracts are going to come off the books. And, I think the consensus is that next year's free agency class is going to be a better class where you have guys that you're actually willing to invest in over multiple years. And I'm going to start digging into the 26 class. I started a little bit today, but I'm going to have like the Athletics, like top 30, 2026 free agents, publishing in a couple weeks. So I'm going to dive into it. But I mean, even like the preliminary look through, like there's going to be more guys. Now, obviously, like you get extensions and tags and all of this stuff. Like like it's going to thin out a little bit. But I think the consensus is that this year's class was pretty poor. And so you do a lot of 1-year deals. You build out depth. If you can get upside on those players in the comp pick formula next year, that's value add. And then you also free up those contracts and that money that you use for next year when you feel like the class is going to be better. And there might be some guys that are, it's more advantageous to invest in those guys on multi-year deals.
Yeah, I think, once Trey Smith went back to the Chiefs, I was kind of thinking like, okay, that's probably the big one. I know you were definitely on board with them signing T. Higgins. I just never really feel like they would pay him what it would take to get him. But Trey Smith was like, okay, this checks out on every regard, and then he gets franchise tagged. So then you kind of pivot to these smaller tier signings, and getting Mekhi Becton at the price that you did, I think is a solid, solid alternative pathway for this team. So there were a lot of takes on on social media, as there always are, about the way that they were not super aggressive. You were, from day one, they're not going to be super aggressive.
I told everybody this.
They're not going to be aggressive.
Everybody this coming out of the
were not
combine.
aggressive.
I think I literally was like, you guys are not going to want to hear this, but I talked to, a dozen people at the combine, and like, this was what everyone said they were going to do.
Yeah. Now we'll see what happens if they can, maybe they swing a trade or something like that. But I was asked this question, so I'm going to ask you this question. In your estimation, have the Chargers done enough to improve the roster based off of what how we saw the season come to an end?
Yeah, I mean, my focus is on the interior of the offensive line. So like that is like that to me, heading out of Houston and into the offseason was like, okay, they got to prioritize this. Now, the guard market got a little wacky, and like the Aaron Banks contract to me was like, I still can't make sense of that amount of money for that player. Like Will Fries was a guy that I really liked, but like, what did that end up at? 5 years, $80 million. for a guy coming off a very significant tibia injury. And like reportedly, this is according to Bob Condata, I think, of who covers the Seahawks, like they wanted to bring him in for a physical and he like refused to do the physical and wanted to agree to terms before a physical, which is why he ended up in Minnesota. So I think like given where the guard market went, they made out okay. You know, there are injury concerns with Mekhi Becton though. Like that's a real thing that I heard from multiple people. It's the reason why his market was what it was. You know, he had cartilage damage in 21 that required surgery. He had fractured kneecap in 22. Like, I think there's a view in the league that like the Eagles got 15 games out of him plus, you know, 3 in the playoffs. And that was like very lucky. I don't know if he's going to be able to replicate that with the Chargers. So like, I think that if you get the high end Mekhi Becton and he plays like he did in Philadelphia and he gives you a full season, that's great. But I also think there needs to be some insurance there. So as far as the interior of the offensive line, like I think I was on with Alex pretty close after the season. He gave me one of his, you know, trademark over unders, putting me on the spot. He said over under, you know, 1.5 new starters in the interior. I went over. I think right now it could happen.
Yeah.
I think they'll eventually get there. I think they're better and deeper. We'll see what happens with the Zion Center experiment, but I still think they have work to do there. Like, I think that I don't think it's going to come in free agency at this point. Like, I don't know if like Will Hernandez is a upgrade over Trey Pipkins, depending on, you know, if they try to move Trey to left guard, but that's really what I'm focused on. Like when you watch that game back, like they couldn't block on the interior. Now, like Joe Alt and Rashawn Slater didn't have good games either. I think we can agree on that, but you'd expect you'd expect a certain level of play from those two over the course of a season. So have they done enough to upgrade the interior? I don't know. That would be like the spot I look at and say, like, there's probably a bit more work to do there. Tight end, I still feel like they need like a real dynamic pass catching option there. Receiver, I think they've set themselves up okay for the draft. I always felt like draft was going to be where they went to really upgrade there, but like the Mike Williams signing always made sense to me. I think they're in a position now to be better at running back. I think they have a more durable, reliable player in Najee if you compare him with a, you know, some juice there. And so like in that regard, I think, you know, there's still some work to be done, but I think, you know, the positive side of it is I think they've set themselves up. Now, defensively, you know, corner's interesting. They took a couple stabs there. You know, I don't know if there's as much upside with Dante Jackson and Benjamin St. Juste as there was with Christian Fulton. Sure. I remember watching Christian last year and being like, okay, like there could be something here. I don't necessarily see the same with Dante Jackson and Benjamin St. Juste. They run it back at safety. Like that feels fine to me. They, you know, Tony Jefferson's back as the fourth safety. I've always felt good about linebacker with Dayon and Junior. They probably need an edge. So like, again, like there's kind of needs here. I think that, you know, there's still work to be done is probably how I would frame it. You know, like I think they've done a decent job of sort of piecing together the depth, but I think there's more work to be done to get this to the point where like you feel like this is a team that can really contend.
Yeah, and obviously the draft is going to be a huge thing there. They have the 10 draft picks, which, you know, you're not going to get 4 starters out of every single draft, but you know, you have confidence in the way that this team can you know, approach it that way. And then, you know, the Ravens have always had a history of, you know, post, you know, draft signings that kind of hit for them. And, you know, they signed Kyle Van Noy to a minimum contract and he had 12.5 sacks for them last year. So, you know, I'm anxious to see what they do and how they approach this draft and, you know, be able to figure out the rest of this roster. So I want to ask you a couple of coaching questions and then we'll get to some chat questions here. You mentioned Mike Elston. It sounds like he is just like a tremendous coaching asset to this team. Jesse Minter, year 2. Where do you think this defense can really, this defensive coaching staff in particular, can take this thing with another year under their belt with some of their guys brought back, secondaries mostly intact? So what are your expectations for the coaching staff in year 2?
Yeah, and I think that's part of this build too, is that the coaching staff on defense prove that they can get more out of less. And so it's like a blessing and a curse. Like a lot of these guys are going to earn themselves promotions and opportunities elsewhere. But at the same time, if you're weighing, like, do we need to give talent to the offense or the defense? You're probably leaning towards the offense because of what the coaching staff showed. I would throw Steve Klingscale in there as well. I think he's like a phenomenal coach. I think specifically with Tarheeb, like he was coaching him hard throughout the season. Every time I talked to Tarheeb, he would immediately bring up something that Steve Clinkscale told him during the week that like directly transitioned to a play that he made on the field. Like, I guess where I'm at defensively is like, I feel like if they continue to have sort of this level of talent, you'd expect them to flirt with top 10. I feel like it's going to be about the same as last year. Like to get to, that type of top 5 defense, you just need difference makers. Like you need playmakers. And how many of those guys do they have right now? Like, do they have a guy that you feel like is a real playmaker in the corner room? Maybe Tarheeb, like he was around the ball a bunch last year, but I don't know if they have it there. Obviously, like you feel good about Derwin at safety and what he can bring. I think they have a playmaker in Dayon, but he missed some opportunities. Like I think he had a really good year, but he had opportunities for interceptions. He had an opportunity for a sack in that Chiefs game that he didn't get done when Mahomes completed it to Kelsey, and that turned into a win. So probably one there. Like Khalil is an ageless wonder at this point, but I think you and I would agree that like he wasn't the same pass rusher in 24 as he was in 23. Now, how much of that was related to the double groins that he pulled in Cleveland? Right. But you feel like you need a little more juice there. I was expecting a little bit more out of Thule last year, even though the sacks were high. I don't know if he was the same pass rusher in 24 as he was in 23. And then like we talked about already, I don't see that player in the defensive line room. So like without real playmakers, it's hard to get your defense to be that top 5 type unit because you got to be taking the ball away. You have to be making these impact plays. Yeah. But as currently assembled, like I think if you give them a baseline level of talent, which I think they have, and we'll see what they add in the draft, like this is always going to be flirting with a top 10 defense because the coaching is so good.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think the blessing and the curse line, it's so true because, Tyler and I have talked about, well, if you're debating between, a first round tight end or wide receiver or a first round defensive tackle or edge rusher or whatever, the inclination is probably to give that pick to the offense because the offense is going to need more help because there's just not as that kind of faith with the offensive coaching staff. And I expect there to be some improvement in year 2 under Greg Roman, but like he needs certain aspects of talent to make his offense work where the defensive coaching staff, I liked Boona Ford. I was intrigued. I certainly did not expect, borderline all pro, kind of play from him. Same thing with Tier Tart. I liked the signing. It made a lot of sense, but I wasn't expecting him to play so well.
Yeah.
Dayon was rotating at linebacker 3 in the OTAs and then had a Pro Bowl level season. So the defensive coaching staff has these guys all over the place. I had a like late 7th round grade on Tarheeb still, and he was fantastic, So this defensive coaching staff is it sounds like they're just amazing. And I'm hopeful that Jesse Minter sticks around, but if he leaves next offseason, it sounds like they have a pretty good pipeline and going if he does leave.
Yeah. I would agree with that. Yeah. I mean, I think I see defensive coordinator in the future for Elston and for Clinkscale. I think those two guys are superstars. So, and like, the reality is if you're flirting with top 10 on defense, like you just need to be a little better on offense. Right. Like you go back to that game, like why did they lose that game in Houston? Like they couldn't protect.
Yeah.
They couldn't protect. Like the defense played more than well enough to win the game, in my opinion. And so like, if you can run it back from a production standpoint and be that sort of fringe top 10 defense and get more out of this offense, like you're probably winning a playoff game, right? Like that's sort of how I view it. And so like, I think you're right on it. Like, I think if they're in these early rounds and they're debating between an offensive asset and a defensive asset, I feel like there's going to be more weight on the offensive asset because it's clear that like they need more talent there to make this thing work, specifically more talent on the offensive line because it just wasn't good enough last year to play the way that they wanted to play in the run game or to like show up against really, really good fronts like what happened to Houston.
Yeah, I agree there. You guys in the chat need to chill out, okay?
What happened?
Got people asking if you could date their daughter. We got people talking about Dayon's dad. We got people talking about the Atlantic instead of the Athletic. You guys need to chill out, or I'm going to start banning some people tonight. This is not how I expected this to go in the chat. Okay, that's all I have.
Wait, I want to get your take on one thing.
Okay.
How are you feeling about the O-line?
I think it's in a deeper position. I think the interior makes a lot of sense if they can add like one more piece in the draft who I think could legitimately challenge for potentially like left guard
Yeah, left
starting
guard's the
position.
spot. Yeah.
I like this guard class a lot. I do not like the center class. So I think they've approached the center class very, very smartly. Tate Ratledge, Miles
Yep.
Frazier on day 2. Those are 2 guys that I'm definitely eyeballing. You've heard some Gray Zabel not first round rumors. You said the other day, Dane
Yeah.
Brugler is like less convinced. So I don't
Did
know.
Dane say that? I didn't hear Dane. What did he say about Zabel?
He said borderline first round, but should go in the first round based off of like offensive line needs.
Yeah, Mike. So I wouldn't be shocked if he ends up being a second round pick.
Sure.
I think he performed really well in the practices at the Senior Bowl, but I think in game action it was like less impressive, at least from what I've heard. And so my question is, like, a lot of people are like pigeonholing him as a center, but why he could be a guard? Like, I think there's plenty of people that think that Zabels could fit as a guard, and he played left tackle in college. So, like, is he an option at left guard? I'm sort of with you. How do you feel about the Zion to center experiment?
I'm skeptical. I think it makes sense for them to try it, but I think if he's going to play a good role for this team, it probably is still at left guard.
Yeah.
Just switching positions in year 5, I do think is that's a tough ask, but so I think you draft somebody on day 2 if you can. I know like they have a bunch of other needs that wouldn't surprise us, but if you can get a Tate Ratledge or Miles Frazier or the one from Arizona, Jonah Savinea, I'm a big fan of as well. Yeah. One of those 3 on day 2, and then you essentially have, is that 5 players? Yeah, 5 players battling for 2 spots, and Mekhi Becton's your starting right guard. So,
yeah, that's happening, by the way. Becton's going to be the right guard. So it's basically like it's Slater and Alt, and Becton is going to be a right guard. So the question is what happens at left guard and center, which I think makes the Andre James signing make a little bit more sense. It's like, okay, you have these 2 spots here. You're going to try Zion at center, but you want multiple contingencies there in case it doesn't work out. So and then Bozeman, has worked at left guard for the Chargers before. So, it could be depending on how the draft goes, it could be a situation where they just flip Zion and Bozeman ends up playing left guard. Like the way this coaching staff works, like James hasn't been a guard. He's only played center, but like they're going to try him at left guard. Like I can guarantee you're going to see that in training camp. So I think like they've built more depth this year.
Yeah.
Like I think they're in a better spot. But I'm with you. Like, I mean, I even like Tyler Booker at 22 makes a ton of sense to me.
See, I don't love Tyler Booker, but it does make sense for them. I learned a lot of lessons from promoting the Zion hype train in 2021.
Everyone was on that though. You couldn't talk to a single person that didn't think Zion was going to be at least like a capable starter.
Yeah. Yeah. It was checked every box possible that you could think of from an offensive line perspective. So it's just really frustrating. Part of me always thinks like, oh, if he had gone to, somebody with a high level, offensive line coach, he probably still becomes that player.
Yeah. I think you're right.
But we'll never know. So my concerns with Tyler Booker are really like the likelihood that he becomes a Pro Bowl level guard because of the lack of athletic traits for me is much smaller than waiting and drafting somebody in the second round. Then you get proper value out of that guard pick. So I don't watch Tate Ratledge and Tyler Booker and see like a huge difference of player.
Yeah,
I think Tate Ratledge is in that same kind of caliber, and you can get Tate Ratledge much later. So that's really my thing with Tyler Booker.
I think like either way, like by the time day 2 is done, I feel like you need to invest in some sort of interior offensive lineman to really create like the type of competition that you want for those 2 spots. And like I think we said, it's Zion, Bozeman, Pipkins, Andre James, and then if you draft a guy, like I think 5 guys competing for 2 spots, and 3 of those guys have multiple position flexibility. Feels like a good spot to be in. Like I feel like you're creating the type of environment that you want, where you can really find the 5 best and go with it.
Yeah, and these are all guys on short-term deals. You mentioned Mekhi Becton's knee injuries. There's a scenario out there, which I hope it does not come to fruition, right? He misses games in 2025. and then the Chargers decide to move on in 2026, and then they're in the same spot where they have to go get more interior offensive linemen. Now the Ravens have a very strong history of like day 3 draft picks and 1-year veterans. Is kind of how they've done things on the interior, but it would be nice to have a long-term interior spot locked down to play alongside Joe Alt and Rashawn Slater for the next 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, that's why I think it makes sense to keep Trey. Like, it's a little bit of and I've talked about this on Hops and Pop, but like,
Sure.
It's a little bit inflated, right, for a 6th offensive lineman if that's what he ends up being, like $9.25 million. But you're paying a premium so that you can have the insurance, and in theory, he could play 4 positions. So like, I think that's fine. And then like if Becton can't play as many games as you expected, like you have a guy that he's at least functional at the position. And that's one thing to mention, right? Like, he didn't play in Houston, and maybe it goes the same. But a big problem in that game was that Jamari just was not up for it at guard. And like, we haven't even mentioned him. So it could like hypothetically be 6 players competing. But I think based on how he played in Houston, that he's sort of an afterthought.
Yeah, the Jamari experience has been a little disappointing as well. I mean, he was a 6th-round draft pick, but his rookie season, and granted it was at left tackle. Maybe he's better at tackle. I guess we'll never know. But this is a much deeper offensive line, and that's the good news. But they do need a long-term investment on the interior for me. Like, even the Ravens would always throw in, like they took Andrew Voorhees in the 7th round. Not that they should not wait until the 7th round to do that. But they do need a long-term investment on the inside.
Agreed.
All right. Let's get to some questions, you guys. I know you've been sending a bunch in the chat. We'll get to some super chats to kick us off. Right on cue, our guy Dark Samus, who is the captain of the Tyler Booker and Jared Wilson hype train.
Jared Wilson, interesting.
Yeah, he loves Jared Wilson. It's kind of a bit of his, but he wants to know if you would draft Tyler Booker if he's available in the 2nd round. At 22, I'm hesitant. In the 2nd round, that's like a no-brainer. Like
55, yeah. Slam dunk.
Yeah.
Run it up there. Yeah.
Only God can judge me says, do you think we will look at Vaughn Miller or Zadarius Smith? What do you think about bringing in Calais Campbell to help the defensive line? What are your thoughts on a free agent edge rusher, like, one of these guys that he's mentioning?
Yeah, I mean, I just feel like they got to get younger at the position.
Yeah, I agree.
Like, I think they have a very clear-cut opportunity here to take an edge, and you could even go later in the draft. Like, I don't think you would go later than like the 4th round, but like, you could even take a swing on like more of a developmental traitsy guy and have him as a 4th edge rusher, special teams player in year 1, give him time to develop behind Bud and Thule and Khalil. I just think that, Bud's on the last year of his deal. Khalil's on a 1-year deal. We don't know if Khalil's going to play another year. I think the Chargers would keep re-signing him until he's 55 if he wants to keep playing. But like, I just think like if those, so like you head into next off season and Bud's going to be a free agent, Khalil's going to be a free agent. At least you feel like you have 2 young ascending players in that room that you can build around. I just think it makes way too much sense to go younger there. The problem is you sign a free agent veteran. Now, like, you can't really explain drafting an edge in round 1 in that situation, or even round 2 or round 3, because it's tough to keep 5 edge rushers. The other part of this too is that you want your 4th edge rusher to be able to play special teams. And part of like, and this is getting very inside football here, but like, they need to have talented players to give to Ryan Ficken. Like, he's done amazing work with the special teams, but when you're giving him, players off the scrap heap and 7th round picks and undrafted free agents, and those are your primary special teams players, like, it's really hard to produce a good special teams unit. So I think it makes a lot of sense here. Get younger, have a plan for the future, bring in a developmental piece, bring in a guy in the first 3 rounds that can really be an impact guy for Ryan Ficken as well. Like, for all of those reasons, I just think it makes way more sense to draft a player. But I don't know what you think, Steven.
Yeah, no, I'm of the same mindset. And part of that is like, we didn't see Thule take a big step, but I think a huge part of that is he was playing a ton on special teams.
Yes.
He was a core 4 special teams player, for the entire season. And
I think he was like 2nd in special team snaps or something.
Yeah, and there were stretches of the season where he was like a starting edge rusher and still playing, 20 special team snaps a game. That's a tough ask for any young player. So they need to get Thule out of that rule, and I do expect him to be a starter, because I don't think Bud is a starting caliber player at this point in time. I would like to see them get specifically faster on the edge. I would like to see them get some speed off the edge. So, there are some day 2 guys that I like. There's some day 3 guys that I like. Kyle Kennard from South Carolina, I think fits. Josiah Stewart from Michigan obviously fits.
Like him a lot. He's just very undersized though.
Yeah, he's like 6 foot and he plays like he's 6'5". He's the most fun I have had watching tape this year, and he's like the smallest edge rusher. His height and weight profile would be like 1 percentile in the NFL, but he's so much fun.
He's basically like Deion size.
Yeah, I didn't think of it like
honestly.
that,
Deion might have longer arms.
Yeah,
I mean, like Josiah Stewart's arms are like under 32 inches.
Yeah. And then there's Oladipo from UCLA, who kind of made the linebacker switch as well. So he's somebody. There are speed rushers that they can draft this year, which is good for them, I think.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that's what they need in the room. Like, because you feel like Khalil can do everything, but at this point, like his bread and butter is power. Thule's a power player. Bud kind of is what he is, but he's more of a power player. Like, I feel like that's why I like Baron Browning was a guy that like I really liked heading into free agency. I mean, I would have done that deal. I think it was like 2 years, 15. Obviously, he did it before free agency started with Arizona.
Right.
But that was like, that kind of fit their profile of free agent too, like young, cheaper. But that I agree 100%. That's the profile. Young, athletic, speed, guy that can impact special teams, take some of that load off Thule. I agree with you 100%.
Yeah, if they were going to sign a veteran edge rusher, that would have been one. Azeez Ojulari would have been another one I would have been interested in, but not. Zadarius Smith is 35. Yeah. Like he's up there in age, and Von Miller is older, I think. So, that position I think is a draft position for sure.
Yeah.
Next one here from Athir. He says that he has the Chargers moving up twice from 22 to 17 to take edge from Georgia. I assume that's Michael Williams.
Yeah.
And from 55 to 47 to take Mason Taylor. Let's go. Your thoughts, Pop.
I don't think the first scenario is realistic. I think we talked about it at the top, like sitting at 22 and just seeing how the board falls and going best player available at any of these 7 positions. Yeah. That's really what I see happening. Now, I love Mason Taylor.
Okay.
Like, I think this guy is exactly what the Chargers need. Like, just the security blanket, over the middle, contested area type player, very strong hands, reliable. Like, it's just a guy that they haven't had since Hunter Henry. Now, are they going to move up to get him? I think they'd probably have to move up even higher than 47. Like, I get big, like Sam Laporta vibes from Mason Taylor that somebody's just going to like that somebody's going to maybe go ahead of his projection and maybe like late first, something like that. I just think he's just like a very well-rounded player. And I like well-rounded tight ends, probably because I've seen so many tight ends come through the Chargers that are just not that type of player. That's the move that I think of the 2 that you posed here. I think that's the one that's probably a little bit more realistic, because they just like tight end is something that they need. He fits. They need a long-term plan. They need a young player there that can grow with Justin Herbert. And so I think that one makes a little bit of sense. I just don't know if they'd be willing to give up capital, but there are a lot of guys like in that like 30 to 45-ish range that are really intriguing. Like Trevion Henderson's a guy that's really interesting if they don't take running back in the first round. He has the exact type of juice that the Chargers are looking for. And I know they've done some work on him. So like, would they, but is he going to be there at 55?
Right. Probably not. So like, I think like if you're talking about trade up, that is where I think it could happen is second round. Cause remember you talked about what Jordan Reed said, right? Like, 16 to 40 ish, you're going to have like a similarly tiered players. So, I could see them maybe making that move up from 55 to take an offensive piece. I could see that happening. Mason Taylor, though, I'm on that bandwagon. You are, and Chargers fans getting some inside knowledge on Trevion Henderson tonight. Love to see it. I'm a fan of not trading up in the first round, because like you're losing picks to do that. If you move up in the second round like they did last year, you can do a pick swap, and then you're not losing those picks. And we saw what they were able to accomplish there. So moving up in the second round, I think is definitely more plausible for this team.
And there's proof of it, right? Like you said last year. I mean, it was like 2 spots, I think, like 37 to 35 or whatever it was. But that like it's just you're not giving up as much. Exactly.
Yeah. Anthony Navarro wants to know your thoughts on Matthew Golden, the Texas wide receiver.
I think it's an option. Like I think the fact that they signed Mike Williams to play the X. Now, obviously, there's going to be some injury concerns there, durability concerns. But because they have a player that can fit that role, I think they have given themselves a little bit more flexibility in terms of how they attack receiver in the draft. I think that they can just look for playmaking versus like, okay, we have to have somebody that can play this position. So Quentin Johnston doesn't play there, And so, Golden, like he has some of that to him, right? Like he has like some contested catch ability. I just worry about a player that's under 6 foot playing on the outside in the NFL and being really effective against some of the size and the physicality that you get in the outside at cornerback, on defense in the NFL. So he's interesting to me. Obviously, he ran a very fast 40. They do need juice in the receiver room as well, like some explosivity. So he's a guy that's interesting. It would depend to me on like what else is there. Like in our beat writer Mac, for example, I had the option of taking Golden, but to me, like Amari and Hampton was more intriguing than Golden, because I feel like there's going to be options in the second round at receiver where you can get a guy that can contribute. But I think like pre-Mike Williams signing, when they were like, we literally don't have an X on the roster, like they were going to have to go take that type of player, and they were probably going to go do it in the second round. Post Mike Williams signing, I think that opens the door for them to maybe take different profiles of receiver and just get guys that can bring juice and playmaking.
Yeah, Matthew Golden has been a tricky evaluation for me because I've never really seen like the 4.29 speed on tape. Like he is fast. I was expecting, like 4.4 type speed. But he's very well rounded. He does everything very well. So I think that would allow them to have some more flexibility with Quentin Johnston and be able to maximize his role and, allow him to focus in on all those crossers that he does so well. And he's on my list at 22, but like you mentioned, I would have Hampton higher. I would have Harmon higher. I would have Kenneth Grant higher. I would have Colson Loveland higher if he falls. So he is on the list of picks I would be okay with, but there are players who I think just would present a higher chance of getting like a difference maker.
Yeah. So I just got access to a bunch of film, and the first guy I'm going to watch is Matthew Golden, because I just find him to be a fascinating profile.
Yeah. You watch the Georgia game and you're like, okay, like this is a guy who definitely checks out. But then, I watched them play. I watched the Clemson game, and he was not super impactful in that game, and he did struggle with some press coverage in that game. So he's a tricky evaluation for me.
So do you think his size will inhibit him at all from playing on the outside in the NFL? Because there was like a period of time where it was like, this is a slot guy. But do you think he can play on the outside at his size?
Think he can play. I think he can play on the as a Z. I don't think he can play full time as an X. I think he could like moonlight as an X, but to me, he's like a backside Z. Like I love his
like dig. Josh Palmer, basically.
Yeah, I love his dig tape. I love his post tape. Like he's really good at those like deep in breaking routes. But I think I would want him kind of off the ball and have some runway to get there. Jose says that he thinks the 1-year contracts will be less and less as they fill the positions through the draft in the next few years. That's certainly part of it. Next year they're going to have a higher, Rashawn Slater extension, for example. So, I think we're going to see over the next couple cycles how this regime really wants to structure contracts. But, they had to do a lot of shredding last year. So I don't know if we know for sure how they want to structure contracts long term.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if like the structuring of contracts is going to change that much, because Ed McGuire is still doing all of the contracts. Like, I don't think that much has changed in that regard. I do think that and I've studied free agency, like probably too much. The way you find value in free agency is through these cheaper 1-year deals. Like that is where, I do, cash spent and value provided. And like pretty much every year, 8 to 9 of the top 10 contracts signed are cheap 1-year deals where guys outperform. It's Puna Ford. Like this is where you find value in free agency. So like I don't necessarily see like huge downside in doing 1-year deals. Like I think like if you really want to get a player, and he wants more stability and wants extra years, like you can do that as an incentive, which I think they did with Mekhi Becton. But if you can get like productive players on 1-year deals, like that's great. There's a lot of potential for upside, and then they immediately factor into the comp pick formula after 1 year. So I don't necessarily see a ton of downside in the 1-year contracts, honestly.
Yeah, the Ravens were not ever huge spenders in free agency, but when they wanted somebody, they would go out and get him. The Marcus Williams signing didn't really work out, but they went and spent for there. They went out and spent on Steve Smith back in the day. So they're not afraid to do long-term contracts. It's just, they've got to find the right fits as well. And, we all remember the JC Jackson contract and how that worked out. So Next one in here from Steven. He says, if the top 2 tight ends are gone and Hampton is gone and we can't get a wide receiver, please give us Grant and beef up that defensive line and give us the next Jamal Williams. There's a lot of love in the guilty as charged community for Kenneth Grant right now. I will say that.
Yeah, I mean, I would be fine with it. I think we talked about it at the top though. Like if I'm spending a first round pick on an interior defensive lineman, I want pass rush upside. Like that's just my opinion. That's just my opinion. And like, you know, he's going to be a run stuffer. He's a huge body. He's physical in that phase of the game. But you can find those type of players later in the draft. You can find them in free agency. Like Deshaun Hand could be that type of guy for them. You know, like I think if you're going to spend a premium pick, you'd want like a clear vision for how you're going to get pass rush upside out of that player. That's just how I would approach it. And I think that's how they would approach it too. But a lot of it depends on who's available. Like there's a scenario where Kenneth Grant is the best player available. Like I think there's a scenario where the board falls that way. And if that's the case, go for it. I just think for me, I'm gonna be looking for pass rush upside with my interior defensive lineman. And I think the likelier scenario is that they're gonna have a better player available. I think.
Yeah, I do think there's a chance that Kenneth Grant hits some pass rush upside, but you know, we're talking about a different kind of tier with a guy like Derek Harmon or TJ Sanders, but I think he can be an effective pass rusher for his role. But yeah,
well, give me a comp. Like what type of how many pressures do you think he's going to give you?
I mean, if
best season,
if he like truly hits his upside, and he didn't like test as well as the rumors were, but you know, his size profile is like almost identical to Dexter Lawrence. Now that's like best case scenario. Dexter Lawrence is like an absolute unicorn of a nose tackle. Like he's the only nose tackle that had more than like 40 pressures last year. You know, there's just not a ton of those guys around that are truly, you know, making pass rush impact as a nose tackle. So does he settle more into like, I don't even know, like who's a good pass rushing nose tackle right now?
Poona Ford.
He had 18 pressures last year or 19.
Yeah, that's a good season. I mean,
that is a good season. That's a very good season for Poona.
Yeah.
Let me pull up PFF real quick and just see who led. I know obviously Dexter Lawrence led the league in pressures from the A gap, but I'm curious now. But yeah, his Dexter Lawrence size profile is like perfect match with Kenneth Grant, you know, but
what were Quentin Johnston's comps in physical profile?
I was actually looking at like you know, the recent receiver classes of like yards per route run versus man coverage and yards per route run versus zone coverage just to see. And Quentin was like, I pulled like the last 4 draft classes, and Quentin was actually like fourth on the list in most yards per route run against man coverage. So that's fun.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
I could see a DJ Reader outcome for Kenneth Grant.
Okay.
He had 22 pressures last year, but that's obviously kind of a down season for him.
Yeah. I guess the other part of this too is like if you feel like you have a defensive line coach in Mike Elston that's going to elevate talent, you know, do you need to take that defensive tackle at 22 if there are concerns about the pass rush upside? Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Reader's best season was 33 pressures and 4 sacks.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, who do you think leads this as currently constructed? Who leads this interior defensive line of pressures this year? Like, I think you could. Yeah, honestly, I don't know the answer to that.
Right now, I would assume it's Tart because he's the one I think would have the most chance of playing on third downs.
The opportunities, yeah. I honestly, I couldn't tell you right now.
Yeah, so they need somebody.
I agree.
Next one here from Will Callahan. This is actually a really interesting question, I think. Can you point out something that Joe Hortiz does that is different than the Ravens organization and maybe something he adds on top of his game?
It is an interesting question. Honestly, not much. Like I think like there is like
he was in Baltimore for a very long time.
Yes. And so I'd like, you know, I think there are 2 prongs to this, right? I think like you could look at it and say that he's trying to replicate Baltimore in Los Angeles. And you could look at that and certainly have some concerns. But at the same time, he also has a very clear plan of how he wants to do things. how he wants to build the team. There's a vision for the philosophy. There's a vision for the identity. So yeah, is he trying to mimic it a little bit? Sure. But that also comes with a very clear-cut approach and vision for how you want to build the team and how you want to play. And that's really important. Like that could be the most important part of team building in the NFL, is coming in and having a very clear vision. If you don't have that clear vision, that's where things can get a little bit wayward and you end up making bad decisions. But if you know exactly who you want to be, you want to be a dominant physical team and you want to win in the trenches, and that's who you want to be, then that allows you to make decisions that are aligned with that philosophy, and it leads to better decision making in that regard. So I don't see a whole lot of differences, but that's not necessarily a bad thing, because there is that clear-cut vision.
I think there could be some differences like down the road, but when you come into that new position, you're going to want to make sure you're able to give yourself the best chance to succeed right away. And so you're going to do what you know, and you're going to do what you're comfortable with. And we saw that, and at the end of the day, you're going to work with your head coach, and maybe that changes down the road and we'll see what happens there. But, there's a lot of Baltimore, and there were a lot of former Baltimore players, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. Like, a lot of people will downplay the Ravens, but they won 2 Super Bowls when Joe was there. They went to the playoffs like every year when he was there. So obviously he thinks that is how the proper way to do things. And that's okay for me.
To build a sustainable winner. Yeah. Like, I mean, honestly, I can't remember a time covering this team where there was like this level of depth heading into the draft, where you felt like they could really take a best player available approach. Like, I always think back to that draft you were talking about, where like it was very obvious that they had to get a tackle and they got Rashawn Slater. It was very obvious that they had to get a cornerback and they took Asante. And it was like they had to get those 2 positions. Right. Now, in what order they went with it in the round 1, round 2, that was the only question. But they had to get those 2 positions. Now, you have this flexibility, and this feels like how you get value in the draft. And I don't think we've seen this before with the Chargers, where you set the roster up and you can really take the best player available, like the Eagles always do. And that's why we're stealing this term draft proofing from the Eagles, because they do it better than anybody, where it feels like they're always in the position to take Quinyon Mitchell, where they're always in the position to take Nolan Smith. And they're always getting value on these picks, always, always, always. And it's because they're draft proofing, they're building depth, and they're not, signing JC Jackson. Instead, they're re-signing and bringing back 17 different players so that they can set themselves up to be in the right position heading into the draft.
Yeah, I think that's true. Great question from Will Callahan. We'll zoom through a couple quick ones here. Have you watched Jalen Royals from Utah State yet?
I haven't, but I did it. I did like a little bit of a dive into him. He's included in my 50 players that the Chargers should be interested in. That's coming out tomorrow morning.
Yeah, I agree. He's a fun one. He would give them some creativity after the catch that they don't really have outside of Quentin right now. So he's a fun one. Only God Can Judge Me back again wants to know if you think there's any chance they bring back Keenan Allen, J.K. Dobbins, or Asante Samuel Jr.
I don't think so. Yeah, I mean, I just don't. What does Keenan bring? Like, where is he going to play, I guess, is the question I would ask.
Right.
Like, to me, if you're signing Keenan Allen, you are signing him at this point in his career to play in the slot. That's where you're going to get the most value out of him. You don't want to give Keenan Allen some of Vlad's slot snaps. I just don't think that would be smart, because you want Lad to be in his best position, which is in the slot. And so what are you bringing him in to do? Like, what you need right now are players on the outside to complement Lad, who's at this point going to be your number 1 receiver. So that's how I would spend my resources. How do you bring in enough outside guys that you can put 3 receivers on the field that give Ladd McConkey the best opportunity to be successful? Because by that Houston game, he was literally getting triple covered. Yeah. Like, there was and Justin still almost hit him on that like over route in the first quarter in Houston. It was like just out of his reach. He was triple covered on that play. They had the nickel corner and both safeties on him. So it's like, you have to bring in guys that can play on the outside, that can take some of the attention away from Ladd. And I just don't know if Keenan's going to be that guy at this point. Asante, the injury thing is real. Like, I think that's why he hasn't been signed. He missed all of last year. I feel like a lot of people talk about Asante and don't mention the fact that he missed the entire season with like a stinger neck shoulder thing that's still a little bit vague.
He said after the season that there was like real nerve damage with that too, right?
Yeah, he said it was like stinger like symptoms, which is like, stinger is nerve damage, a nerve injury. So I don't know about that one. And like, would it shock me if JK came back on a 1 year cheap deal? Like, I wouldn't be shocked. But I think the approach that makes more sense to me now that they have a guy that hasn't missed a game in 4 years, and Najee Harris is to find that juice. Like I sort of compared it to 2023 with the Lions.
Yeah.
When they signed David Montgomery in free agency to a $6 million APY deal, they got Najee Harris for 5.25, and then they drafted Jahmyr Gibbs in the first round. And now you have durable, tough David Montgomery with super explosive Jahmyr Gibbs. Obviously, the offensive line was in a really good place, and then they roll from there. So that would be my approach versus bringing back JK. I would want to find that type of explosive back in the draft, pair him with Najee, and roll from there.
Yeah, I agree. Miguel says, "What's up, Hopper? Who are some of your fave DTs?" I assume that's draft defensive tackles. You mentioned Derek Harmon earlier. Anybody else that has jumped off to the screen for you?
Yeah, Harmon's the guy that I really like. I think that if now he was obviously off the board in our beat writer mock, but that's the guy, like in the first round, if you're talking about taking a swing, like, and seeing if you can bring somebody in that can really make a difference on the interior. That's the guy I would point to right now. And I think like he's pretty much consensus. Like,
yeah, he's always like in that like 20 range.
Yeah. So that's the guy I would be looking at. We talked about Kenneth Grant. I just don't know, like, if your best trade is run stuffing, I have a tough time with that at 22.
Round.
Yeah, I have a bit of a tough time with that at 22. But yeah, I'm gonna dig more into the tape. Like I said, I just got access to a bunch, so I'm super excited to dive into some of these guys.
There we go. Can't wait to see it. Last couple here from Aether. He thinks the Chargers can win 13 games next year and wants to know if you think he is crazy for that.
I don't think you're crazy. I mean, they won 11 last year with a roster that they really pieced together. So I mean, it's always hard to win 13 games. I think it's within the range of outcomes, though. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, especially if they can get some improvement on offense. This is a fun scenario here. CJH wants to know if they'll bring in Patrick Herbert as an undrafted free agent.
Why not? They got to give him the signing bonus, though. It all comes down to signing bonus with the undrafted free agents.
Yeah. Did you see the picture of him and Justin at their pro day?
I didn't.
They look identical.
Really?
Like, Patrick has a mustache, but like they look like they could be twins.
Really?
Yeah.
That would be fun. Why not?
Yeah, we got Bronny James. Yeah, Patrick Herbert. Let's go.
Like, $4,500 signing bonus. Get him in there.
He doesn't need money. He can just move up his brother anyway.
Right. Yeah.
Go be Justin's roommate.
Yeah, exactly.
Our last one, or we have one more, other one after this. Iman12 says, Popper, what RBs are you high on, and would you like the Chargers to pick, or who would you like the Chargers to pick outside of Ashton and Omari?
Yeah, I like Trevion Henderson. Caleb Johnson, I want to watch a little bit more on, the Iowa kid, and then the Oregon kid,
Jordan James.
Yeah, I like him as well. So those are a few I'd throw out. But yeah, I'm interested to dive into Caleb Johnson. Have you watched him?
I have. I am a little lower on him than most.
Okay.
But he's very fast on the football field, I will say.
Yeah, the metrics were crazy with some of his like breakaway percentage and stuff on PFF. Yeah. Like his statistical profile would tell you that he's a very explosive player, but I need to watch it on film to like see if the numbers in the film match up.
Yeah. Damian Martinez he's my day 2 guy. I love Damian Martinez.
Who's Alex on? That's what we need to know. I mean, he freaking nailed Kamani last year.
That one's a little unfair because there's a Rutgers running back, so he loves Kyle Monange from Rutgers, obviously.
Who was the corner he was all over? Max Melton.
I get the Melton brothers confused if
Bo Melton's the receiver. Yeah, Max Melton.
Yeah,
has he been any good?
I don't think he played very much last year.
Okay, we only talk about the hits. yeah.
Correct. But yeah, this running back class is a ton of fun, and the good news about watching running back film is you can really just zoom through it. So yeah, but Trevion Henderson, he's gonna have a very long career because he's very fast and he pass protects like crazy. So
love that.
I love watching his pass protection tape. His teammate Quinshon Judkins, also a lot of fun if you haven't watched him.
More of like a bruiser type though, right?
Yes.
Okay.
More of a bruiser type.
Yeah.
Your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man said, would y'all be on board with Colston first round and Higgins second round?
I mean, that's like a dream draft now.
Yeah.
I don't know if Higgins is going to be there at 55 though. And I don't know if Loveland's going to be there at 22 either.
Yeah, there's a lot of like Loveland tight end 1 smoke coming out right now. I don't know if I buy that. Doesn't seem like you buy that.
No.
Um,
I watched the Giants take Evan Ingram. Like, and I'm not saying that they're the same player, but I'm just like, don't overthink it. I mean, Tyler Warren is 6'6", 255, absolute beast with the ball in his hands, like contested catch. He's exactly what you want in a tight end. Can block. Like I'm actually excited to dive into Loveland blocking film a little bit just to see exactly what he has there and what you can project. But my interpretation right now is that Warren is more of a ready-made blocker at this point, and like gives you like real juice in the passing game. Yak, contested catch, operating in those tight windows over the middle of the field. And like he played wildcat quarterback. Like he just put the ball in his hands and he's like bulldozer.
Yeah. There was a rep against Iowa, I want to say, where he drove his guy like 8 yards and then through the end zone. Like Tyler Warren is like, he's so much fun as a blocker. I watched the Notre Dame tight end. I totally forget his name. Mitch Harris? No. What's his name? Gosh, this is bad of me. This is bad hosting. Mitchell Evans.
Mitchell Evans. There you go.
Mitchell Evans. He's a guy I think does.
He's like a day 3 guy.
I have a round 3 grade on him currently. He seems like somebody that could be, a much better pro than college player because he tore his ACL in 2023. But his blocking tape is fantastic. So for those who want a blocking tight end, I know the Chargers.
Wait, what number did he wear? Because I feel like there was a guy when I was watching Michael Mayer tape 2 years ago.
I think he was 88.
Yes, he was like the other tight end.
Yeah.
And I was like, who is that guy?
Yep.
Yeah.
That
was him.
Very typical Notre Dame tight end, but he ran like a 4.7, and his number 1 RAS comp was actually Mark Andrews. So
okay,
he's not a slow-mo poke out there, but he's not a burner by any means either. He's not Terrence Ferguson or one of those guys.
What's your stance on this Bowling Green kid, Harold Fannin?
I think the initial hype when we started was like he's a round 2 player, and I think that's a little crazy. It's kind of settled into a round 3 player, and that makes a lot of sense to me. He is very similar to Isaiah Likely, so I would not be surprised if the Chargers took him. But he's that kind of like him and like Chigo Okonkwo from the Titans. It's like you're gonna design touches, yards after
Maryland
catch.
product.
Yeah, when he blocks, you're gonna like get him on the move, like H-back type of blocker, and he can do those kind of things, but he's just not like a super crisp route runner. He's not like vertically inclined. Like he's a yards after catch, get the ball into the flat, let him create yards after catch, and he can be successful that way.
Sounds useful.
Yeah,
I mean the numbers were outrageous this year.
Yeah, his yards per route run total was like over 4 yards, which is crazy.
Yeah. And he set like the FBS record for tight end yards and receptions. He had 107 catches.
Yeah. I said last question. We got 3 more in here. Real quickly.
All right, let's rip them.
Chats here. With your experience interacting with the players and coaches, who would you spend a day building sandcastles with at the beach? This from Hippo Life.
That's a tough one. I've got 3. Should I pick one?
You can pick the top 3 if you want.
All right, top 3. Dayon.
Yeah.
Derwin. Easton Stick.
Easton Stick?
Easton's my guy. Easton's a great dude.
Okay.
Easton's awesome. Easton is a really, really good dude. Super, super smart. Yeah, he'd be chill to spend a day at the beach with.
Yeah, Dayon and Derwin have to be top 2. Like the jokes, like the vibes would be tremendous there.
100%.
Baker's man, do you think the most important trait in our next receivers is natural hand catchers, considering Herb throws some passes way too hard?
Yeah, I mean, there definitely is a little something there with Herbert's touch. I think if like you were going to criticize his game, that's probably where you'd start, or like not running enough in a big playoff game, if we're going to be more specific. But I think your skill set wise, you're more looking for somebody that can play the X, because I think like Mike Williams is a fine stopgap insurance option, but like I think you need a long-term answer for somebody that can play that position, somebody that can isolate on the outside face press coverage, beat it, win in contested catch situations. Mike has been that player in the past, but I think like if you're looking for what's the skill set that you're prioritizing here, it's going to be that. So I mean, like I think every receiver you draft, you want them to be a natural catcher of the football. I think that's sort of like a understood aspect of receiver, but I think like diving a little bit deeper, I think you're looking for that X type guy.
You can be body type catchers, man. Like Keenan Allen had this great quote a couple of years ago. He's like, you just got to catch it. Like if it's with your body or your hands, who cares? Mike Williams is a great body catcher. As long as you're good at it, I don't think it really matters.
Yeah.
All right. Last one here. He wants to know, how do you plan to ask Jim questions for next season? Because Jim rarely gives you straight answers.
I'm not changing anything. No. I mean, Jim and I are cool guys. All right. And like, I think there's definitely, it was a little bit of a learning process this year just to like figure out like on which days he's going to be more open to talk, which days he's a little bit more closed off. Like, I think what I realized is that like Mondays after a win, it's a great time to ask more like open-ended stuff, try and, get some stories from his playing career, like that kind of stuff. He was great on Mondays after wins. Now Wednesdays, it's like he's a completely different guy because I think he's like into game planning mode. It's like we're not giving away any competitive advantage. So it was a little bit of a learning process to figure out, okay, like I think Fridays are a little bit chiller. It's a good day to maybe like, ask some more interesting questions. So I think I figured out like which days to ask it. But like as far as injury stuff, like I'm doing this for you guys. My life will not change if I know what Rashawn Slater is dealing with during training camp. I just know that all of you really want that information, and I'm trying to get it for you guys. So like that's my process there. But I know it's kind of a funny question, but I think honestly, like I did learn a little bit about like maybe pick your days as far as like if you're looking for something where he might like dive into his play. He has so many incredible stories. Like he told one story about like a conversation he had with Walter Payton in like the preseason of like 1989 or something like that. And I think like, Mondays after wins, he's like, he'll go 25 minutes with us and answer whatever. And he'll be like quirky, funny Jim.
Yeah. We appreciate the injury questions because we get a lot of the questions too. And I'm like, we're not there. Like, we don't know. So, the Rashawn
part of the job.
It is part of the job. And somebody's got to ask the tough questions. And we're glad that somebody does. All right. So I kept you way longer than I said I would. We really appreciate the time here. Any final thoughts, any final send-offs before we let you go?
Yeah, so tomorrow I'll have a more expanded big board up, just 50 players that I think they could target in the first 2 rounds, popped in throughout the list and kind of added some notes on some guys that I like, that I find particularly interesting. And then I will be writing mock 2.0 tomorrow, and it'll be up either Thursday morning, Friday morning, and then I'll be doing a mock 2.0 like podcast version of my mock where I just go through that. So look out for all of that and join us on Substack. We're having a ton of fun.
Yeah, it is a ton of fun. Thank you so much for joining us. As always, this is a blast. You guys listening, watching, thank you so much for tuning in. Make sure leave a like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. Check out Hops with Pop on Substack. This will do it for another episode of the Guilty as Charged podcast. We'll see you guys on Thursday for our next episode. As always, bolt up.